The tremble under Carter's palms wasn't subtle anymore. It pulsed through the concrete like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the earth. Dust sifted down from the tunnel ceiling in a slow, gritty rain. Somewhere above, boots pounded into position, voices overlapping, the whole roadblock shifting from confusion to containment. The flashlight at the far opening stayed locked on Carter's face, bleaching him in hard white, turning his breath into a bright, shaking plume. He felt suddenly, horribly visible like prey pinned by a hunter's gaze. Contact. In the pipe. The voice at the far end screamed again, and Carter heard the quick, urgent clatter that followed metal on metal, someone fumbling, someone bracing. Another voice barked, calmer, authoritative, "Hold your fire. Do not shoot into the culvert unless you want it to collapse. Get it sealed. Now." Carter's stomach lurched. "Sail," he whispered, barely able to make sound. His throat was raw, and the word came out thin. He tried to twist to look back at her, but there was no room. The tunnel was a tight ribcage of concrete and wet stone, and Sail filled the space behind him like a living wall. Her hand still held his ankle with that steady, impossible gentleness. Not a leash. Not a restraint. A promise that he was not going to be lost in the dark. She breathed once, slow and controlled. Then her voice came low, close, rough with restraint. "Not cage." Carter swallowed hard. "They're going to flood it," he rasped. "Or gas it." Or he couldn't finish because the worst options all sounded equally real. The tremble became a thud, heavy and rhythmic, like someone dropping something massive onto the road above. Carter pictured them dragging concrete barriers into place. He pictured them stacking vehicles across both ends. He pictured them sealing the world shut because it was easier than admitting the world was wrong. The far end light wavered as the person crouched their shifted position. Carter caught a glimpse past the beam. Night sky, wet grass, the silhouette of legs in uniform. The man outside the exit wasn't alone. Other shapes moved behind him. A second flashlight snapped on. Then a third. "Read!" Someone shouted, voice distorted by the tunnel. "Carter, read. If you can hear me, speak. Confirm your status." Carter's heart hammered. That wasn't a kill order voice. That sounded nervous. Like someone who didn't want to be here. Like someone who still believed this might end without a body. Above them, a new sound rose in electric whine, steady and growing, like a motor spinning up. Carter didn't know what it was, but his body recognized it as danger. The kind of sound that meant machinery was being used on a problem humans didn't want to touch directly. Sail's breath changed. A subtle shift. She understood tone and vibration and intention even if she didn't have the vocabulary. Her fingers tightened slightly around Carter's ankle. Carter forced himself to think. He couldn't fight. He couldn't negotiate with a flashlight. He couldn't outcrawl a flood with Sail behind him and soldiers in front. But he could do one thing. He could try to slow the moment when fear turned into irreversible action. He sucked in air and shouted toward the far opening, voice cracking. "Don't do it. Don't flood this pipe. You'll kill us both." The shapes outside froze, just for a beat. Then a voice snapped back, sharp and incredulous. "Carter? Carter, read?" Carter recognized that voice like a punch to the chest. Not someone from the roadblock. Not a random cop. "Facility. Voss?" he rasped. There was a pause, and when she answered, her voice had a tight edge that sounded like she was forcing herself to stay calm while a knife hovered over her throat. "Yes. It's me. Listen to me carefully. I don't have much leverage left." Carter's eyes burned. "You said you were relieved." "I was," Voss said, clipped. "That doesn't mean I left." He heard movement on her end, her boots shifting, maybe her body braced in a crouch by the culvert mouth. "Carter, they've got command on site. I can't override them. But I can stall them. I can make it messy enough that they hesitate." The whine above the tunnel rose another notch, and Carter felt the concrete vibrate with it. He pictured a pump. A blower. Something meant to shove something into the pipe. Carter swallowed. "They're going to flush it," he said. "I know," Voss snapped. Then her tone softened by a fraction, the human part slipping through. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to talk. Keep them listening to you, not just to orders. Can you do that?" Carter's mouth went dry. He glanced back as much as he could, and Sail's amber eyes glinted in the dark behind him, steady, fierce, waiting. "Shoes," she'd said. Not because she wanted permission to kill. Because she wanted him to pick the shape of their survival. Carter faced the lights again. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "Yeah, I can talk." "Good," Voss said. "Then tell them the truth. Tell them you're alive. Tell them she hasn't killed anyone tonight. Tell them she stopped when you told her to. Make them picture it. Make them doubt the monster story. Carter almost laughed, but it came out as a cough. They already shot her. I know, Voss said again, and her voice tightened as if the knowledge hurt. They want her to snap. Don't give them what they want. The far-end flashlights shifted, the beams stacking, crowding. Carter blinked against the glare and forced his voice louder. Listen, he shouted. You've been lied to. She could have killed me a dozen times. She didn't. She's hurt because you shot her. A voice from outside snapped, impatient. Step out, Reed. Come out now and you won't be harmed. Carter's stomach twisted at the hollow promise. He stared at the silhouette of the man nearest the opening. The way his hand shook around whatever he was holding. You can't promise that, Carter yelled back. Your own command net ordered you to terminate me on sight. That's murder, and you know it. The soldier outside hesitated. Carter heard the faintest shift in posture, the kind you make when your brain catches up with what your mouth has been repeating. Another voice barked from farther back, colder, louder. Do not engage in conversation. Maintain containment. Voss's voice came through again, urgent now, like she was pushing against a closing door. Carter, they've got a pump set up. They're going to force smoke through. If they do, you have seconds before you start losing function. I need you out of that pipe. Carter's blood went ice. Out where? He snapped. You're at the exit, Voss. They're at the exit. There's nowhere. Voss didn't answer immediately. Carter heard her breathing. Heard the scrape of something, maybe her hand on concrete, maybe her shifting her weight. Then, very quietly, she said, there might be. Carter blinked hard. What do you mean? Maintenance maps, Voss said, voice low and fast. There's a branch line. Old storm drain. It's not marked on the road plans because it was pre-facility. It runs off this culvert about 40 feet in. Narrow. Tight. You might miss it unless you're looking. If you can get into that branch, you can pop out downslope in the ravine. Carter's heart slammed. 40 feet. In a tunnel packed with sail. In darkness. With smoke coming. He twisted as far as he could and hissed to sail. Branch tunnel. Side exit. 40 feet in. Kinesail's eyes sharpened instantly. She didn't need all the words. She needed the shape of the problem. She released Carter's ankle and, impossibly, shifted backward a few inches to create space. The concrete groaned. Carter felt the tunnel flex with the movement, like the world itself resented their existence. Sail's hand slid forward again, not to hold his ankle this time, but to press flat against the tunnel wall beside him. She closed her eyes and listened to the concrete like it was speaking. Then she tapped. Once. Twice. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. Carter stared at the wall. He didn't see anything. Just wet concrete, slime, mineral stains. Sail opened her eyes and pointed at a patch of darkness where the wall looked slightly different barely. A seam that wasn't a crack, but a join. A hidden junction swallowed by algae and time. Carter's throat tightened. There, he whispered. Sail nodded once. Then she braced her feet against the tunnel floor behind him and pressed her palm into the seam. The movement was careful, controlled. She didn't smash. She didn't rip. She applied force like she was prying open something stubborn but valuable. The concrete creaked. A thin line of black opened, and cold air breathed out of it like a secret. Behind them, from the entrance they'd come in, the whine above the tunnel suddenly spiked, then the first dirty curl of smoke rolled into the pipe like a living thing. It clung low to the trickle of water and crawled forward. Carter! Voss shouted, panic cutting through her control. Now! Now! Carter's lungs seized at the first taste of it. He coughed hard and felt his vision blur. Go, he rasped to Sail. Open it! Open it! Sail's jaw clenched. The seam widened another inch, then 2, the darkness beyond deepened tight. It looked barely big enough for Carter to wedge through. For Sail, it looked impossible. Carter didn't have time to think about that yet. He shoved the radio and first aid kit through first into the black gap, then forced his shoulders after it. The concrete scraped his arms raw. The branch tunnel was narrower than the main culvert, lower, tighter, and it angled down immediately, sloping into darkness. Smoke poured behind him. He coughed again, choking, and scrabbled forward on elbows and knees. The air in the branch line was colder, cleaner, but damp with rot. He heard Sail behind him, her breathing turning harsh as the smoke reached her. Sail! Carter shouted, voice ragged. Come on. He heard the main tunnel rumble as the pump increased. Smoke surged forward in a thick wave now, and with it came muffled shouting from the far exit, people yelling, angry, urgent, because they could see the smoke and they knew what it meant. Carter shoved forward another foot, then another, and looked back into the black seam. Sail's face filled it, eyes glowing faintly. She was trying to fit. One shoulder pressed through, then stuck. The concrete groaned in protest. Sail hissed, muscles tightening, and for a second Carter saw the truth. She could open doors, break shutters, bend steel, but she couldn't shrink. Not without breaking the world around her. Smoke rolled around her like a tide. She blinked against it, tried again, and the tunnel screamed with stress. Carter's stomach dropped. Sail, stop. He coughed. You'll collapse it. Sail's eyes snapped to his, burning with refusal. Not cage. Not separation. Not again. She shoved harder. The seam widened a fraction and then the ceiling above the branch line cracked with a sharp, sick sound. Dust poured down onto Carter's hair and shoulders. Carter froze, terror punching through the fever. Sail. Her eyes flickered. For the first time, doubt surfaced. Not fear for herself. Fear for him. Fear that her strength would kill the thing she was trying to save. Behind her, in the main culvert, smoke thickened into a solid wall. The world above shouted. The pump whined. The searchlights at the far exit flickered through haze like distant stars. Sail stared at Carter, then at the collapsing seam, then back at Carter again, and he saw the decision tearing at her from the inside. Choose, she demanded of him. Now the universe was demanding it of her. Carter's voice broke. Sail, you can't. He coughed so hard he nearly vomited. You have to let me. Sail's jaw clenched. Her hand reached into the branch line and touched Carter's wrist, just the tips of her fingers, gentle as grief. Then she said, very quietly, in a voice that didn't sound like a vow anymore. Together. Carter shook his head violently, tears stinging his eyes from smoke and panic. No. Sail's eyes hardened. And then she did something Carter couldn't have predicted. She withdrew. Not because she wanted to. Because she understood what she almost done. She pulled back out of the seam and into the main culvert, disappearing into smoke, into noise, into the open mouth of the cage she refused. Carter surged forward, screaming her name, but the branch tunnel swallowed his voice. The smoke stayed behind him now, held at bay by the narrowness, but he could still hear it, the chaos outside, muffled and distant, and underneath it, a deep impact like something enormous moving fast in a space too small. Sail. Carter's hand shook so badly he could barely crawl. He shoved forward down the branch line, chasing the slope, the trickle of water, the faint pull of cleaner air. He needed out. He needed to circle back. He needed to do something. Anything. The branch line opened suddenly into a vertical drop, a broken shaft where water had eaten away earth and left a jagged hole. Carter skidded to a stop at the edge, peering down into darkness. He could feel air rising from below, open space. He heard voices above, far off now, shouting. He heard the pump still whining, distant. And then, from the direction of the main culvert, a sound rolled through the underground like thunder. A roar not loud in the way of anger, but loud in the way of something finally breaking. Concrete cracked. The tunnel groaned. Something collapsed. Carter's blood went cold. Sail, he whispered, voice shredded. Above, through earth and asphalt, he heard someone scream, she's coming out, move. Carter's breath hitched. He didn't know if that meant escape or capture or slaughter. He didn't know if Sail was alive or if the culvert had become her tomb. He stared down into the dark shaft at his feet, the only exit he could see, and felt the world tighten around a single, brutal question. Do you jump and risk dying alone, or do you crawl back into the smoke to find her? And before he could decide, the entire ground shuddered again, harder this time, and the flashlight beams from above vanished as if someone had turned the sky off. The sky didn't turn off. Carter realized that a heartbeat later. The light vanished because the road above had become motion. Vehicles shifting, people running, beams swinging wildly as whoever held them tried to keep their feet under them. The whole world overhead had lurched out of formation like a flock startled mid-flight. Concrete dust sifted into the branch shaft at Carter's feet in a fine gray curtain, and the air that rose from below suddenly smelled different: fresh earth, wet stone, and something sharp like scorched plastic. He stared into the darkness of the drop, chest heaving, and listened. Above, muffled through layers of soil and asphalt, he heard the smallest town siren stutter and change pitches. Engines moved. He heard shouting, no longer crisp commands, but startled, broken yells that had the ugly edge of real fear. Then came a new sound, unmistakable even through dirt and distance. A heavy, rolling impact, like something enormous striking the underside of the world. Sail wasn't trapped. Sail was moving. Carter's mind tried to imagine what moving meant inside a culvert full of smoke with armed people on both ends and concrete that didn't want to flex. Every mental picture ended with bodies and collapse. His stomach churned. Sail, he whispered again, and the word came out like a plea and a curse. He looked down into the shaft. It wasn't a clean vertical pipe. It was a jagged erosion hole where water had undermined the branch line and left a broken throat descending into deeper drainage, older tunnels, rougher tunnels, the kind nobody mapped anymore because nobody expected to need them. The air coming up was colder and cleaner than the smoke behind him. It was an exit, maybe, or a fall. Carter's hand shook as he pulled the radio up and thumbed it on. Static, then chaos, overlapping voices, clipped phrases, panic leaking through discipline. Asset breached. She's on the road. Keep civilians back. Then, sharp as a knife, Voss's voice cut through for half a second, ragged, urgent, too close to the action. Carter! Carter, respond. Where are you? He nearly sobbed in relief. He leaned into the radio. I'm in a branch line, he rasped. Sail, she backed out. What's happening up there? A burst of static. A harsh male voice, cold voice, overrode the channel with brutal authority. All units, lethal force authorized. Neutralize the asset. Repeat, neutralize. Voss came back, louder, furious, like she was shouting into someone's face. You fire into a populated roadblock and you'll kill civilians. Stand down. A gunshot cracked through the radio audio close to whoever was transmitting, then the channel flooded with shouting. Carter's skin went numb. He lifted the first aid kit like it was an anchor and stared into the shaft again. If he dropped down, he might survive the fall and find a route away. He might also break his leg and die slowly in the dark. If he crawled back toward the main culvert, he'd be crawling into smoke and collapsing concrete and whatever fight was happening at the exits. Sail had pulled back from the branch line because she didn't want to crush him. But if she was above ground now, exposed to floodlights and guns, then Carter wasn't the fragile thing anymore. He was the only thing she'd hesitated for. He didn't have the luxury of a clean choice. He had a bad option and a worse one. Sail won't leave me, he whispered, voice hoarse. So I don't leave her. Carter swung his legs over the edge of the shaft and lowered himself as far as he could, fingers clawing at broken concrete. The drop was deeper than his arms. He dangled for a breath, pain spiking through his shoulders, then let go. He fell. It wasn't long enough to feel endless, but it was long enough to know fear is a physical thing. He hit slanted rubble, rolled, slammed into wet stone, and ended in shallow water with a grunt that tore itself out of him. His shin exploded with pain. Not broken, he didn't think, but bruised hard enough to make his vision flash white. He lay there in ankle-deep water, gasping, hands splayed on slick rock, and forced himself to move. He dragged the first aid kit toward him, checked that the radio hadn't shattered, then pushed up onto trembling arms. The tunnel around him was older and rougher, reinforced in places with corroded metal, open stone in others. Water trickled everywhere, a constant, whispering sound. The air was damp and cold and blessedly free of smoke. He clicked the radio again. Static. Then a fragment of Voss, barely a thread. Carter, if you can hear, get away from the road. A deeper tremor ran through the ground. This one came from above, and it carried something else with it. A faint metallic ringing, like guardrails being hit, like a vehicle door being torn, like the world making sounds it wasn't built to make. Sail. Carter limped forward, following instinct and the faint slope of the tunnel that angled toward where the road had been overhead. He counted breaths to keep moving. 1, 2, 3, cough. 1, 2, 3, swallow bile. The fever made the tunnel sway. He kept going anyway, because stopping meant thinking too clearly about how small a human was in a war he didn't understand. After 50 yards, he found a ladder bolted into the wall, an old maintenance access leading up. The rungs were slick with slime. He grabbed them with shaking hands and started to climb, each step sending knives through his shin. The further up he went, the louder the world became. Voices, sirens, the ugly thump of rotor wash, and above it all, a low, vibrating sound like an enormous animal breathing hard through clenched teeth. He pushed a hatch. It didn't move at first. He shoved again, harder, and it lifted with a gritty scrape. Cold night air poured down like a slap, and Carter hauled himself up and out behind a line of brush on the downhill side of the road. The scene above was chaos. The roadblock had been blown apart physically and emotionally. One police SUV sat angled across the road with its driver's door hanging open, light bars still flashing like a heartbeat that didn't know it was dying. Another vehicle had been shoved half onto the shoulder, tires spinning uselessly in mud. People scattered in broken clusters, local cops, a ranger, a couple of civilians Carter couldn't identify shouting, ducking, trying to find cover behind their own cars. And in the middle of it, framed by hard lights and drifting smoke, was Sail. She was half in the road, half in the shoulder, one hand braced on the asphalt like she'd hauled herself up from the earth itself. Her bandaged shoulder was torn open again, blood dark against her skin. Her face was smeared with grime and ash. Her eyes were ferocious and wild, and locked on the dark government vehicle near the center of the barricade, the one without a light bar. The vehicle's rear door hung twisted, the frame bent like it had been pried. A man in tactical gear lay near it, scrambling backward, weapon raised but trembling. Another figure behind him was shouting into a radio, voice breaking. "She's out! She's out on the road! Jesus!" Carter's heart punched his ribs. "Sail!" He tried to shout, but his voice came out thin, swallowed by sirens and rotor wash. Sail's head snapped toward the brush line. Her eyes found him instantly. And in that moment, Carter saw the difference between her rage and her bond. Everything in her posture shifted, not softened, not calmed, but redirected. Like a storm turning when it finds the one point it refuses to destroy. She took a step toward him. Someone screamed, "She's moving toward the tree line, take the shot." Carter's blood went cold. He threw his arms out instinctively, trying to make himself a target, trying to make a human shape that said don't shoot even if no one listened. "Don't," he roared, and it tore his throat raw. A helicopter searchlight slammed down on Sail, pinning her in white. Another beam caught Carter in the brush. For a heartbeat, the two of them were lit up like evidence. Then a gunshot cracked sharp, close, and Sail flinched as something struck her. Not a bullet this time, something that bit and sparked across her side. A stun round. Her muscles locked for a fraction of a second. Her teeth bared. Her hands curled like she was about to rip the road apart. Carter stumbled forward out of the brush, limping into open ground like an idiot. "Sail! Look at me!" he screamed, voice cracking. "Look at me!" Her eyes snapped down to him, and he saw the war inside her again. Every part of her wanted to end the threat. Every part of her was being baited into doing exactly what they wanted. Carter forced himself closer, step by step, pain screaming through his leg, until he was right at the edge of her reach. He looked up at her towering frame and shouted the only thing he could think of that might reach her through the noise. "Rule 1. Sail's chest rose and fell hard. Her jaw trembled. Her eyes flicked to the tactical team, to the helicopter above, to the dark vehicle. Then back to Carter. "Unless have to," she growled, the words forced out like they burned. Carter nodded violently. "Yes. Yes. You're doing it. You're doing it right now. Stay with me. Stay with me." For one breath, she held. Then the cold voice came through a loudspeaker someone had hooked into the police PA or brought their own. It filled the road with sterile certainty. "Asset, you are ordered to surrender." Carter read, "Step away from the asset immediately. This is your final warning." Carter's head snapped toward the voice. He couldn't see the speaker, but he could feel them close, hiding behind equipment, behind authority, behind a microphone. He tasted the shape of command in the words. He raised his middle finger without thinking, which was stupid and pointless and the most human thing he'd done all night. Then he turned back to Sail and said, lower, direct, cutting through the noise like a blade, "They want you to snap. They want it on camera. If you lose it here, they win forever." Sail stared at him, breathing hard. The searchlight made her look like a creature from a nightmare. The blood made her look real. Her eyes narrowed. "Then we go," she said. Carter nodded. "We go." Sail reached down careful, unbelievably careful, and cupped Carter around the torso, lifting him off the asphalt. Not a grab. Not a claim. A rescue. Carter clung to her thumb, dizzy from the sudden height and the flood of lights. She took one step backward, angling toward the tree line. Another. The tactical line shifted, rifles tracking her like she was a moving wall. A voice shouted, "Stop. Stop now." Sail didn't stop. The helicopter dipped lower, the rotor wash whipping everyone's jackets and sending leaves spiraling into the air. The searchlight tightened like a fist. Carter squinted up and saw something hanging beneath the chopper, some kind of rig or winch or frame. Not just a spotlight. Something prepared. His stomach dropped as the shape swung slightly into view. It looked like a net. Not a fishing net. Not a rope ladder. A heavy, reinforced capture net, the kind you used when you wanted something alive but pinned. It unfurled in the wind like a spiderweb. Carter's mouth went dry. "Sail," he whispered, and his voice vanished in the roar. Sail looked up. For the first time since he'd met her, Carter saw a flash of pure, naked fear cross her face. Fear of the cage, fear of restraint, fear of being wrapped and dragged back into a box with bright lights and hungry hands. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, the helicopter's winch whined, the net dropped, and the world above them decided the shape of the next moment. The net blossomed open in midair, rushing down toward Sail's head and shoulders like a falling ceiling. Carter felt her muscles coil under his hands. He didn't know whether she was going to run, fight, or do something far worse. And then the net hit her hard, starting to wrap. The net didn't just land. It bit. Thick, weighted cords slapped across Sail's shoulders and chest, cinching as the winch above tightened. For a fraction of a second it looked like it might actually work, like enough woven metal and polymer could turn her into a pinned animal the way the facility always promised it could. The helicopter dipped, rotor wash hammering the road, and the net drew taut with a brutal, confident snap. Sail's breath punched out of her in a harsh sound. Her knees flexed. The cords dug into her wounded shoulder, and blood instantly smeared dark along the strands. Carter felt the net brush his face, heard the scrape of fibers against his ear, and realized with sick clarity that they weren't just capturing her. If it wrapped fully, it would wrap him too. A dangling bundle. A trophy. Sail's eyes went wide, then narrow. Fear flashed raw, ancient, and then it curdled into something else. Not blind rage. Not the berserk snapping they were trying to provoke. A cold, focused refusal. "No cage," she growled, voice vibrating through Carter's ribs. She didn't thrash. She didn't flail like a trapped animal. She planted her feet. The asphalt cracked under her heel as she shifted her weight and braced, muscles in her legs and back bunching like cables drawn tight. The winch whined louder as it tried to lift, the helicopter straining in the air. And for a second Sail's massive frame rose an inch, maybe two, before she forced herself down again, anchoring to the earth like she intended to become part of it. Carter clung to her thumb and looked up at the net tightening across her. He could see metal hooks in the weave, anchors meant to catch and lock. A system built by people who thought every living thing could be reduced to restraints and procedures. Sail's fingers curled around Carter instinctively, turning his body inward against her chest, shielding him from the worst of the tightening cords. Then she reached up with her free hand and seized the net. Not grabbing randomly, she found the line that mattered. The main load strand, the part the winch depended on. Her fingers closed, and Carter saw tendons stand out under her skin as she hauled it down and away from her throat. The winch screamed. The helicopter lurched, yawing slightly as the load shifted. On the road, soldiers shouted over each other. Someone yelled, "She's got it! She's got the line!" Carter's mouth went dry. He knew what they'd do next. A different sound cut through the chaos, short, sharp, percussive. Not a gunshot. A thunk. Then another. Then a third. Impact rounds. Non-lethal in the same way a brick to the skull was non-lethal, designed to break while without technically killing. Carter saw one slam into Sail's ribcage and explode in a spray of sparks. She flinched, teeth bared, and the net tightened again as the helicopter took advantage of the moment. "Sail!" Carter shouted, voice shredded. Don't lose it." Sail's eyes flicked down to him, and that single glance was the only thing keeping her from doing something catastrophic. Carter could feel at the razor edge she was balancing on, the way the net and the rounds and the bright lights were pushing her toward the simplest solution: tear everything apart until there was nothing left to hold her. Then, from somewhere near the police line, another voice rang out closer than the loudspeaker, raw and furious. "Stop firing!" Carter's head snapped toward it. Voss. She was out in the open, half behind the hood of a police SUV, one hand up like she could physically block bullets with authority. Her face was smeared with dirt, hair disheveled, eyes blazing. She looked like someone who'd finally run out of patience for following rules that were written by people who didn't have to watch the consequences. A tactical officer near the dark government vehicle whirled on her. "You're relieved, Commander." Voss didn't even blink. "Then arrest me. But you fire again, and I swear to God you'll kill a civilian." She jabbed a finger toward Carter, tiny in Sail's grasp, barely visible, but there. "He's right there." The cold voice on the loudspeaker replied instantly, calm as a guillotine. "Commander Voss, stand down. This is not negotiable." Voss turned toward the vehicle the voice was coming from, and Carter saw the shape of it now. A man in dark gear standing just behind the open rear door, face still mostly hidden, posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the chaos. He wasn't a field guy. He was command. The kind who didn't raise his voice because the world usually moved when he spoke. "Go to hell," Voss shouted back. The man's head tilted slightly, like her defiance was an interesting bug. Noted. Sale's attention flickered between the net above, the rounds hitting her, and Carter's voice. Her breathing was harsh now, shoulders trembling under strain and injury. The helicopter's winch whined higher, higher, like it was approaching a limit. Carter felt something in Sale change again. Not rage. Not surrender. A decision. She shifted her grip on the netline and pulled not up, not down sideways, toward the shoulder of the road where the guardrail ran and the rocky embankment dropped. The helicopter corrected instinctively, trying to stay centered over its load. That correction put it closer to the tree line than the pilot wanted. The rotor wash tore through the branches, snapping twigs, flinging leaves like shrapnel. Sale used that. With her feet still planted, she yanked the netline again, forcing the helicopter into a tighter hover than it could comfortably maintain. Carter heard the engine pitch change strain, compensation, the ugly sound of something being pushed outside its comfort zone. The winch screamed. The net cinched and Sale's wounded shoulder bled faster where cords dug in. Carter realized what she was doing and felt his stomach drop. She wasn't trying to get away clean. She was trying to make the helicopter back off or lose control without attacking it directly. A shove toward risk rather than a strike toward death. Rule 1, twisted into something brutal but restrained. The helicopter drifted closer to the tree line, blades chewing air just above the highest branches. The searchlight swung wildly. Someone on the ground screamed, "Pilot, pull up! Pull up!" Another impact round hit Sale's thigh. Her leg buckled a fraction. The net tightened. The helicopter surged. Carter felt Sale's grip on him tighten reflexively, and he heard her make a broken sound that wasn't pain so much as fury at the idea of failing. "No," she growled, and it sounded like she was talking to the world itself. Then sudden, sickening change. A sharp metallic crack snapped through the air, loud enough to cut through the rotors for half a heartbeat. The netline jerked. The helicopter lurched hard to one side, nose dipping, tail swinging. Carter's eyes widened. "Sale!" She looked up, and for the first time he saw real uncertainty in her expression, not fear, not rage, but the cold realization that the system above them had just broken in a way neither side could fully control. The helicopter pitched again. The searchlight went skittering across the road, the beam slicing over faces and vehicles like a panicked eye. People scattered, screaming. The winch whined, then stuttered, then screamed higher. The net suddenly slackened by inches, just enough. Sale didn't hesitate. She surged sideways toward the tree line, dragging the net with her like a caught thing. The helicopter tried to correct too late, and its rotor wash slammed into the trees in a violent burst. Branches exploded upward. Leaves and debris whipped across the road. And then Carter saw the thing that made his blood turn to ice. The net wasn't the only thing attached to the winch. There was a secondary line, a stabilizer cable now whipping loose in the air like a steel snake, snapping toward the roadblock, toward the cluster of civilians and cops scrambling for cover. Voss saw it too. She sprinted out from behind the SUV without thinking, moving straight into danger, shouting something Carter couldn't hear. The cable snapped down. The road lit up in a chaotic flash of white and blue and spinning debris. Carter's vision tunneled. Sale roared not in rage, but in alarm, and clutched Carter tighter against her chest as she lunged into the trees, the net still half wrapped around her, the helicopter bucking overhead. Behind them, someone screamed Voss's name. Carter twisted in Sale's grip, trying to see through branches and strobing light, trying to tell if she was down, if she'd been hit, if the cable had, and as Sale crashed deeper into the forest with the net dragging and the helicopter struggling above, Carter realized something terrifying. They had stopped being a contained asset recovery. They had become an incident, the kind that never stays secret. And somewhere behind the lights and sirens and rotor wash, the cold voice on the loudspeaker said one final, perfectly calm sentence that Carter heard even through the chaos: escalate. Sale didn't run so much as force a path into existence. Trees bent. Brush exploded outward. The net dragged behind her, snagging on trunks and snapping free with sharp, whipping reports that sounded too much like gunfire. The helicopter stayed above the tree line for a few seconds, stuttering, pitching, then pulled up hard, rotors clawing for stable air. Its searchlight wobbled once across the canopy and vanished into the gray smear of smoke and cloud. Carter was crushed against Sail's chest, not painfully, but tight enough that he could feel her heart hammering. Her breathing was ragged and hot near his ear. Every few steps she hissed as the net cords bit into her torn shoulder, and Carter's hands fumbled uselessly against the webbing, trying to find a knot or latch or anything that would give. The material wasn't simple rope. It was designed to resist exactly this. Sail slowed down. Carter tried, but his words got swallowed by the forest's roar. Sail didn't slow until the ground dropped again and the trees thickened into a natural trench, an old washout packed with ferns and deadfall. She plunged into it and finally stopped, crouching so low her knees pressed into mud. The net bunched around her like a shed skin, half pinned by snagged cords. Carter slid down from her grip, landing hard on his good foot and then immediately regretting it as his shin flared. He caught himself on a mossy log and sucked air. "Okay," he panted. "Okay. We're not dead." Sail's eyes tracked him first, not the sky, not the smoke. Her gaze flicked over his face, his hands, his limp. Then she exhaled one tight breath that seemed to release a fraction of the panic she'd been holding back. Only then did she reach up and claw at the net. Carter snapped the first aid kit open with shaking fingers. "Let me see your shoulder." Sail's jaw tightened. "No time." "Always time for bleeding," Carter shot back, and he didn't soften it. "If you drop, I drop." For a beat she looked like she might argue, then she did something that would have been unthinkable earlier. She held still. Just long enough. Carter pressed gauze against the torn bandage, feeling warmth soak through instantly. The bullet wound hadn't been catastrophic, but it was messy, reopened by the net cords and her movement. He worked fast, hands slick, tearing tape, wrapping, compressing. Sail hissed once, then locked her jaw and endured. "Good," Carter rasped, more to himself than her. "Stay with me." Sail's eyes narrowed, and she said it back, quiet and fierce. "Stay." Above them, the forest glow changed. The smoke wasn't just behind anymore, it was spreading. Flickers of orange pulsed through trees farther uphill. The facility teams had either started the burn line or lost control of it. Either way, the valley was becoming a giant funnel, and they were inside it. Carter clicked the radio. Static, then a wall of voices, dozens now, maybe more. Multiple agencies. Multiple nets. The word incident had become operation. And then Voss's voice came through, clipped and strained, as if she was transmitting while moving. "Carter, if you're alive, key twice." Carter nearly dropped the radio. He slammed the button twice. "Voss? Where are you?" There was a pause too long, and when she answered, the bravado was gone. "I'm here. I'm still here." Carter's throat tightened. "Were you hit?" Another pause. "Not bad," Voss said. And Carter heard the lie in it instantly because it was his own phrasing. "Listen." They escalated. It's not just the facility anymore. DHS got pulled in. State police. They're about to lock the whole region down. Carter felt his blood turn cold. They can't do that quietly. They don't care about quiet anymore, Voss snapped. Then her voice dropped. They care about ending it before anyone asks why there's a helicopter dumping capture nets on a county road. Carter looked at Sail. Her eyes were on him, intent, reading the shape of danger from his face. "We're in a washout," Carter whispered into the radio. "She's hurt. I've got her bandaged, but I know she's hurt." Voss cut in. "Carter, you need to get out of the woods. Fire's going to do what bullets haven't. You need hard cover and you need leverage." Carter's mind snatted on the word. Leverage. Voss exhaled. "There's a place. Old communications relay station on the ridge east of you. Abandoned, but it still has a tower. If you can get there, you can get a signal out. Not to me, to the public. To anyone. If this becomes visible, command can't just erase you." Carter stared into the smoke-lit trees. The idea was insane. The idea was also the only thing that wasn't just running until they collapsed. "How far?" he asked. 2 miles, Voss said. "Maybe less if you cut through the ravine. But you have to move now. They're deploying drones with thermal. They'll sweep the washouts." Carter swallowed. "And you? Where are you?" Silence. Then, very softly, Voss said, "Buying you time." Carter felt a heavy, sick pressure in his chest. He pictured her back at the roadblock shouting at command, stepping into danger to keep civilians back, refusing to let this become a massacre. He pictured that steel cable snapping. He pictured someone screaming her name. "Voss," he said, voice cracking. "Don't be a hero." A rough laugh came through the speaker. "Too late. Go." The channel clicked dead. Carter just stared at the radio for a beat, like he could will it back to life. Then he looked up at Sail and forced his voice steady. There's a relay station. Tower. If we can get there, we can broadcast. We can make this too big to bury. Sail's eyes narrowed as she processed. Broadcast like talk big? Yeah, Carter rasped. Talk big. Loud. Everyone hears. Sail looked toward the glow of fire, then toward the darker line of ravine ahead. Her jaw clenched. She reached down and tugged at the net again, testing it. The cords resisted, stubborn, clinging to her like the facility's last touch. Carter wiped his hands on his pants and stepped closer. Sail, he said, and waited until her eyes met his. Rule 1. We don't kill our way out. But we also don't let them put you back in a box. Not after all this. Sail's nostrils flared. Then she said, quietly, like it cost her something to shape the words. No cage. Know them. Carter nodded. Then we go to the tower. We make them choose. Explain this to the world or stop. Sail looked down at the net, then back at Carter. She touched his chest with 2 fingers light, deliberate, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a claim. It felt like agreement. She crouched lower, braced her feet into the mud, and began to tear the net with controlled, relentless force strand by strand while Carter packed the kit and tightened his grip on the radio like it was the only weapon he had. Above the tree line, far off, the helicopter's rotors returned higher now, not searching blindly anymore, but circling like a shark that had finally smelled blood. And somewhere beyond the smoke, in a direction Carter couldn't see but could feel, a siren tone changed deeper, heavier like more units had just entered the grid. Sail got the net off the way you peel a thorny vine from your skin, slow enough not to tear flesh, relentless enough that it had no chance to win. Each strand snapped with a sharp crack that echoed down the washout. Carter flinched every time, expecting that sound to turn into gunfire, but the forest was still loud with bigger things. Wind shoved by rotor wash, distant shouting, the hungry hiss of fire chewing through brush. When the last cord finally gave, Sail let it fall into the mud like dead skin. She flexed her fingers once, as if checking that her hands were still hers, then looked up at Carter. Tower, she said, crisp. Carter nodded and pointed toward the ravine's darker line. We stay low. Water where we can. Avoid open road. Sail didn't wait for more words. She moved, and Carter followed, limping harder now that adrenaline was draining. His shin throbbed in heavy pulses. Every breath scraped. But he kept up because Sail, wounded and hunted, still kept her pace matched to his, not out of pity, but because losing him wasn't acceptable. They cut into the ravine, the world narrowing around them into rock and shadow. The creek here was thinner than the river, but it was enough to keep them in a wet channel that confused tracks and muffled sound. Above the ravine rim, searchlights swept, occasionally slicing down through gaps and branches like knives. Each time one neared, Sail would freeze instantly, becoming part of the rock, and Carter would press himself into mud, holding his breath until his chest burned. Once, a drone buzzed overhead, close enough that Carter could hear the tiny whir of its motors. Sail crouched lower, shoulders hunched, ridges flattened. Carter watched the drone's little green status light flicker through leaves. It hung there for a heartbeat too long, and Carter felt his blood turn to ice. Sail's hand slid over him, covering his back and shoulder like a shield. Her skin was warm against the cold mud. The drone drifted, shifted, then moved on. Carter exhaled shakily. Okay, he whispered. Okay. Sail glanced down. Alive, she said, as if checking a box. Yeah, Carter rasped. For now. They climbed out of the ravine when the ground began to rise, following Voss's direction east. The ascent was brutal. Roots snagged Carter's boots. Loose stones slid under his weight. Sail moved ahead and then back, ahead and back, clearing a path, offering her hand when the slopes deepened, letting him take it without argument. His earlier anger at the tether and the carrying had burned out into something simpler. If he fell behind, he died. If she fell, they both did. Pride didn't buy oxygen. As the ridgeline neared, the forest thinned. That terrified Carter. Thin trees meant fewer places to hide from the sky. It also meant the tower, if it existed, would be visible from a distance. Then Carter saw it. A metal skeleton rising above the treetops, dark against smoke-stained cloud. Not huge, but tall enough to snag lightning. An old relay mast with dishes still clinging to it like barnacles. At the base, a squat concrete building with a slanted roof, half swallowed by vines. Tower, Carter breathed, relief and fear mixing into something bitter. Sail's eyes sharpened with focus. She moved faster, and Carter forced himself to keep up. The building came into view, faded warning signs, a rusted chain-link fence collapsed in sections, an old access gate hanging crooked. It was abandoned, but not peaceful. The kind of place that felt like it was waiting. Carter reached the fence first and squeezed through a broken gap. The ground inside was littered with old cable spools and cracked conduit. Sail ducked under the bent top rail like it was nothing and stepped onto the compound's gravel, her weight crunching loud in the still air. Carter's radio crackled suddenly, making him jump. Not Foss this time. A different channel bleeding through, louder, closer. Thermal sweep indicates large heat signature moving toward relay. Confirm. Carter's stomach dropped. They were already triangulating. He rushed to the building's steel door and yanked. Locked. Of course, he hissed, scanning for a window. The nearest pane was cracked, but intact, heavy security glass. He tried the frame anyway. No give. Sail stepped up behind him and placed her palm on the door, not smashing, just testing. Carter didn't need to ask. He nodded once. Careful, he said. Sail's lips tightened as if careful was an insult she'd learned to respect. She slid her fingers into the seam, and the metal groaned as she peeled the door outward, warping the latch until it gave with a shriek. She pulled it open just enough for Carter to slip inside. The interior smelled like dust, old electronics, and mildew. Racks of equipment lined the walls, most of it dead, but there were still battery boxes and panels with faded labels. Carter's fevered brain latched onto one thing: a small cabinet with a backup power unit and a coaxial feed line that ran up toward the mast. Please, he whispered, half prayer. He fumbled for the cabinet latch, hands shaking. It popped open. Inside, a battery meter, dark. A power switch. A tangle of cables. A small maintenance handset with a microphone, like something you could patch into an emergency transmitter. Carter pressed the power switch. Nothing. He slapped it again, harder. Come on, he rasped. Sail crouched in the doorway behind him, shoulders filling the frame, head angled to listen outside. Her presence made the small room feel like a bunker, but it also meant she was a beacon if anyone got eyes on this place. Carter's mind raced. Backup power might be dead, but there could be a generator. He scanned the room, spotted a wall panel labeled AUX Power GN. The door was locked with a keypad, but the keypad was ancient. He yanked the panel cover off with the edge of a screwdriver from the first aid kit and stared at wiring. Okay, he muttered. Okay, simplest circuit. He didn't have time for finesse. He had time for one desperate attempt. Outside, Sail's head snapped up sharply. Her whole body went rigid. What? Carter whispered without looking. Sail raised a finger, listening. Rotor wash. Not distant now. Close enough that the building's roof vibrated. A helicopter was coming in lower, scanning, not circling blindly, moving with confidence. They'd found the ridge. Carter's stomach twisted. He jammed two wires together. Spark snapped. The smell of burnt insulation filled the air. The panel's tiny LED flickered weakly, then died. Damn it! He hissed, voice cracking. The helicopter's searchlight swept across the compound, bright as noon, and Carter saw his own shadow thrown across the wall like a condemned man. Gravel outside crunched boots, multiple. The ground team had arrived too. Sail let out a low, warning breath. Carter finally looked back and saw her face tight, focused, on the edge of violence again, but waiting for him. Carter, she said, and the way she said his name sounded like an alarm. He forced his brain into one last idea. The tower itself. Even if the equipment was dead, the mast might still have a beacon line. Or at least height. Height meant signal. He grabbed the handset and the radio, shoved them into the first aid bag, and stumbled toward the rear of the building where a maintenance ladder ran up an interior shaft to the roof hatch. Up, he rasped to Sail. We go up. If there's any chance to broadcast, it's up there. Sail hesitated for a fraction of a second. Roof meant sky, meant exposure, meant nets and bullets. Then she nodded sharply. Up. They moved into the shaft. Carter climbed first, dragging his bad leg, hands slipping on cold rungs. Sail followed, impossibly quiet despite her size, the ladder shuddering under her weight. Below them, the building door banged. Voices shouted. Someone called, check the structure. They're inside. Carter's heart hammered so hard he tasted blood. He reached the roof hatch and shoved. It was stuck. Of course it was stuck. He slammed his shoulder into it, pain exploding, and it shifted an inch. He shoved again. It opened just enough for cold air to knife in. Then the roof exploded with light as the searchlight caught the hatch seam. A voice boomed from below, amplified now someone with a loud hiller. "Come out with your hands up. Now." Carter hauled himself through the hatch and onto the roof, wind slapping his face. The tower rose beside them, steel lattice slick with mist. From up here, he could see the glow of fire lines in the valley, a sick orange smear. He could also see, off to the west, the roadblock lights still pulsing, distant now, like a memory of chaos. Sail's head emerged behind him, then her shoulders, then she crouched low on the roof, trying to make herself smaller under open sky. The helicopter hovered to their left, close enough that Carter could see the open side door and the dark shapes inside gear, straps, someone braced with a launcher-like device aimed toward the roof. Not a rifle. Something meant for capture. Again, Carter's brain went very calm in the way it sometimes did right before disaster. He crawled toward the tower base where a small service panel sat, half-rested. He pried it open and found a coax junction with an emergency tag. A line still ran up the mast. He didn't know if it was live. He didn't know if it mattered. He just knew it was something. He shoved the handset connector into the port and pressed the transmit button. A harsh squeal blasted through the handset speaker feedback, static, something alive enough to be loud. Carter's eyes widened. Oh my God. Sail stared at him. Carter raised the handset to his mouth, hands shaking, and spoke into it with everything he had. "This is Carter Reed. If anyone can hear this, if this is broadcasting, there's a non-human prisoner being hunted and they are trying to execute us." The helicopter's engine pitch changed. The door gunner shifted. The launcher device tilted toward Carter. The loudspeaker below barked, furious. "Stop transmitting. Now." Carter didn't stop. His voice rose, cracked, but kept going. "They're on this ridge right now, state police and a black ops unit. This is an illegal operation." Sale suddenly grabbed his arm, not to pull him away from the handset, but to point. Carter followed her finger and felt his blood freeze. Beyond the helicopter, beyond the compound, at the edge of the smoke-stained horizon, there were headlights. Not a few. A line. A convoy climbing the ridge road, dark vehicles, no light bars, moving with purpose. And above them, faint, but unmistakable, another helicopter larger than the first coming in from the east with no searchlight on at all. The cold voice crackled through the loudspeaker one more time, perfectly calm, perfectly final. "Cut the transmission." The helicopter's launcher fired. The launcher's thump was softer than a gunshot, but the projectile moved with the same intent. It arced across the gap in a blurred dark cylinder, trailing line, and Carter had just enough time to see it before Sail did what Sail always did when danger pointed at him. She put herself in the way. Her arm snapped up and the projectile struck her forearm instead of Carter's chest. It burst on impact, not an explosion, but a violent unfurling. A second net, smaller and tighter, blossomed around her limb and shoulder, cinching instantly as the attached line yanked taut. Sail's breath punched out of her like she'd been hit with a hammer. Carter stumbled backward, handset still in his grip. The static squeal shrieked as the connector tugged. His voice fractured into noise. "Sail!" he shouted, dropping the handset and grabbing for the net's cords. Sail didn't roar. Not yet. She looked down at the net wrapping her arm, then up at the helicopter, eyes narrowed with cold, lethal math. The line tugged again, hard, trying to pull her off balance and drag her toward the roof edge. Sail planted her feet and resisted. The roof trembled under the strain. Loose gravel skittered. Carter crawled toward the tower base and jammed his shoulder into the junction panel, trying to shield the connection point from being ripped free. The handset squealed and then dropped into a steady, ugly hiss. Below, boots hammered up the interior ladder. The building shook with impacts as the ground team rushed the roof access. The loudspeaker barked again, now edged with frustration. "Last warning. Release the device and lie down." Carter's hand shook as he grabbed the handset again and shouted into it anyway, voice raw and ragged. "They're trying to cut us off. If anyone hears, record this. They're deploying nets." There the netline yanked Sail again, harder. Her injured shoulder buckled, and Carter saw her jaw clench so tight it trembled. Blood seeped through the fresh bandage in dark petals. Sail looked down at Carter. He saw it in her eyes. She could break the line. She could pull the helicopter out of the sky. She could rip this roof off the building and turn everyone below into scattered bones. Rule 1. But Rule 1 was being used as a weapon against her now. Carter's mind snapped to Voss's words: leverage. Visibility. Make it too big to bury. He shoved the handset into Sail's hand. She stared at it, confused for a fraction of a second. Carter grabbed her wrist and forced the transmit button down with his thumb. Say it, he rasped. Anything. Your name. What they did. Let the world hear you. Sail's eyes flickered language barriers, fear, rage, the weight of a lifetime of being silenced. Then she looked past Carter at the convoy lights climbing the ridge road, at the larger helicopter sliding in from the east without lights, at the tightening noose. Her chest rose and fell once, huge, steadying, and she spoke into the handset. Sail, she said, first clear, deliberate. Her name chosen, claimed. Then, haltingly, she added, no cage. The phrase went out into the hiss, into whatever path the old mass still had to the world. Carter didn't know if it was reaching anyone. He didn't know if it mattered. He just knew it was a line drawn in air. The larger helicopter from the east lowered into position above the compound, silent compared to the first, heavier, more stable. Its belly light clicked on briefly, not a searchlight, but a focus beam aimed at the tower base. Carter felt the hair on his arms rise. That beam wasn't for visibility. It was for targeting. A sharp pop sounded from the tower base, and Carter saw a small canister strike the roof near the hatch, rolling, spinning, trailing a thin ribbon of white smoke grenade. Not the forest fire smoke. Clean, thick, manufactured concealment meant to blind optics and flood the roof. The white plume erupted and crawled fast, swallowing the roof in seconds. Carter coughed as it hit, eyes burning. Sail's nostrils flared. Her pupils tightened. Her breathing went harsh. Fear, memory, the culvert. The purge smoke meant suffocation and containment and panic. Carter grabbed her hand in both of his and shouted over the rising roar, Sail. It's just smoke. It's cover. Don't lose it. Sail's fingers tightened around his, crushing just shy of painful. Her other arm strained against the netline as it tugged and tugged, trying to pull her through the smoke toward the edge. From inside the building, the roof hatch banged violently, someone slamming it from below, trying to force it open. Metal shrieked. Carter's lungs burned. He couldn't see more than a few feet now. The helicopter's rotors churned the smoke into thick, chaotic swirls. Voices shouted from all directions up the ladder, from the roof edge, from the convoy arriving at the fence line. And then, through the smoke, a new sound emerged, a high-pitched rising whine, different from the winch. Focused. Electrical. Like a giant insect charging its sting. Carter's stomach turned. Sail heard it too. Her head snapped toward the sound, eyes wide. The netline went taut one more time and yanked her shoulder hard enough that she stumbled a step toward the roof edge. Carter stumbled with her, still holding her hand, still refusing to let go. Out of the smoke, a shape stepped onto the roof, dark armor, helmet, no local police markings. Not a soldier with a rifle. A man with a long, two-handed device that hummed with that high electrical whine. A specialized taser or stun lance built for something big. He leveled it at Sail. Carter threw himself in front of it without thinking. The man hesitated just a fraction because he saw Carter in the way. That fraction was enough for Sail to move. Not to strike the man's body. To strike the device. Her free hand snapped out through the smoke and slapped the weapon's barrel sideways. The crackling arc fired into empty air, exploding in a harsh blue-white flash that lit the roof like lightning. Carter felt the ozone sting his nose. The man cursed and stumbled back, trying to re-aim. Sail's eyes blazed. She could end him. Carter grabbed her wrist and screamed, Rule 1. Sail froze, one heartbeat caught between instinct and the sound of Carter's voice. That pause saved the man. He retreated into the smoke, shouting for support. Carter's chest heaved. His voice came out broken. We have to go. Now. Off the roof. Into the trees. We can't. Sail's gaze locked on him. Then she spoke again, close enough that he felt the words rather than heard them. Together. She gathered him up tight, secure, and turned toward the roof hatch, the only way down. The hatch banged again from below, finally giving a fraction. Too late. Sail drove her foot into the roof near the hatch, not to collapse the building, but to dent the metal around it and jam it shut again. The banging stopped abruptly, followed by furious shouting muffled under steel. Carter coughed, eyes streaming. Sail, that buys seconds, not minutes. Sail didn't look back. She moved toward the tower's lattice, grabbed a vertical beam, and started to climb. Carter's stomach dropped. What are you? Sail climbed fast, hauling herself up the steel skeleton with Carter in one arm like gravity had changed sides. The smoke thinned as they rose above the roofline. Wind slammed into Carter's face. Below, the roof was a white boiling cloud. The helicopters hovered on either side like predators. Sail climbed higher 20 feet, 30 until they were level with the lower dish array. From here, the forest spread out in every direction, dark and smoking, and the convoy lights at the ridge road looked like a necklace tightening. Carter looked down and felt vertigo claw at him. "Sail!" he shouted into the wind. "We can't jump." Sail's eyes flicked to the far side of the compound where the slope fell sharply into thick treetops. A drop into canopy. A violent, desperate escape. Carter's blood went cold. "You'll break your leg." My leg. Sail pressed her forehead briefly to Carter's, a gesture so intimate it almost didn't fit in the chaos. "No cage," she breathed. Then she shifted her grip on him, positioning him against her chest, shielding his head, tucking him as if she'd rehearsed this in nightmares. And she let go of the tower. The fall stole sound first. Wind roared so hard it turned Carter's scream into nothing. The compound lights spun into a smear. The helicopters became two dark shapes hanging above a boiling roof cloud. For one sick heartbeat, Carter felt weightless, held only by Sail's arm, and the brutal certainty that gravity didn't care about vows. Then the treetops hit them. Branches snapped like dry bones. Needles tore at Carter's face. Something slammed into Sail's shoulder and she grunted, the sound ripped out of her by impact. Carter was crushed against her chest, protected the way she protected him from bullets and nets and smoke, only now the enemy was the forest itself. They plunged through layers of canopy, slowed by violence, redirected by chance. Carter caught flashes. Moonlight through needles, dark trunks whipping past, Sail's arm locked around him like a cage he didn't fear. A thick limb struck Sail's side, and the net line still attached to her arm whipped above them, snagged, and tore free with a shriek of strained cable. They hit the ground in a rolling crash. Sail landed first, shoulder and hip absorbing the impact in a grunt that shook Carter's ribs. The earth struck Carter a fraction later, but softened by Sail's body and the bed of ferns they'd smashed into. Pain exploded through his shin anyway, bright and sharp, and he tasted blood as his teeth clacked. For a second, the world was nothing but ringing. Then Sail moved. She didn't lie there. She forced herself up on one elbow, breathing hard, eyes wide and feral, scanning. Carter saw her bandage torn open again, blood slicking her side. Her chest heaved like she'd run 10 miles instead of fallen 30 feet through trees. "Carter," she rasped. "I'm here," he croaked, and tried to sit up. The moment he shifted, lightning shot through his shin and he nearly blacked out. "Oh God!" Sail's hand came to his leg, careful, hovering, not crushing. Her brow tightened. She looked at his shin like it was a problem she could solve by will. "Don't," Carter hissed through clenched teeth. "Just help me up." Sail slid her arm under him and lifted him into a crouch, keeping him close. Carter's foot barely touched ground. He could stand, but it was bad. Not broken, maybe, but close enough that every step would be a negotiation with pain. Above, the forest thundered with rotors again. The helicopters had recentered and were searching beams stabbing down through gaps in canopy, sweeping. One beam caught the glint of the fallen net line tangled in branches nearby and lingered, then moved on. Carter's stomach twisted. "They'll follow the drop," he panted. "They'll assume we landed near." Sail didn't wait. She turned and moved, half carrying him, feet pounding soft earth. She stayed under the thickest canopy, weaving between trunks, angling downhill again toward darker terrain where searchlights had less reach. Carter clung to her forearm and forced his mind to work through the pain. They'd bought maybe minutes, maybe less. The relay tower transmission was probably already cut. The convoy was on the ridge. The larger helicopter had deployed smoke and a stun lance. This wasn't a team with patience anymore. This was a team with permission. He clicked the radio, more out of desperation than hope. Static. Then, for half a heartbeat, a voice came through, faint, ragged, like it was slipping away. "Carter, if you hear Voss." Carter rasped into the mic. "Voss, I'm here." "We jumped off the tower. We're in the trees east side." Static crashed over his words, devouring them. He slapped the radio, cursed, tried again. Nothing. Sail's pace slowed just enough to keep him from bouncing into unconsciousness. She glanced down at him, eyes asking a question she didn't have words for. Carter swallowed and answered anyway. "Signal's gone," he said hoarsely. "Either jammed or dead." Sail's jaw clenched. She looked back over her shoulder toward the ridge, toward lights and smoke and the place they'd just escaped. A low growl vibrated in her throat. Not rage at the people. Rage at the trap itself. At the endless, repeating pattern of capture. "No," she breathed. "Not again." Carter forced a breath that didn't turn into a cough. "We can still win," he lied, because the truth would have broken them. "We just need one more chance to get proof out." Sail stared at him for a long second. Then she pointed forward, down the slope, where the forest thinned into a dark cut, a narrow service road or trail winding away from the ridge. Along it, in the distance, faint headlights moved slowly. Civilian, not convoy. A lone vehicle creeping through smoke and confusion, maybe trying to leave the area. Carter's heart jolted. A car. Sail nodded once. Her eyes were intent now, focused. Not on killing. On exit. They angled toward the road, moving as quietly as Sail's sighs allowed. Carter's shin screamed with every step. He tried not to whimper. He bit down hard enough to taste blood again. Sail lowered herself into a crouch as they neared the road edge, and Carter finally heard a civilian voice through an open window, nervous, talking to someone on speakerphone. I don't know, there's cops everywhere, there's smoke, something's in the woods. The car slowed to a crawl as it approached a bend, headlights sweeping over trees. Carter's pulse hammered so hard he thought the driver would hear it. Sail's hand tightened on Carter's waist, steadying him. She looked at him, eyes hard with a question. Do we do this? Carter swallowed, throat dry. We have to, he whispered. Sail moved. She stepped into the road just far enough to be seen, too big to be ignored, too sudden to be rationalized. The driver screamed. Tires squealed. The car skidded and stopped sideways, engine revving in panic. Carter threw his hands up, limping forward into the light, trying to look human, trying to look like the only sane thing in a scene that couldn't be sane. Please, he shouted, voice raw. Don't run. We're not here to hurt you. The driver's door flew open. A man stumbled out, hands shaking, phone clutched like a weapon. What the? His eyes flicked to Sail and he nearly fell. Jesus Christ, listen to me. Carter yelled, forcing urgency into coherence. They're hunting her. They're going to kill her. They'll kill me too. We need your help, your phone, something to record, to call anyone, news, anything. The man's mouth worked soundlessly. His gaze darted toward the ridge where helicopters thumped and lights strobed through smoke. He looked like someone whose brain was rejecting what his eyes insisted was real. Sail crouched lower, trying clumsily to appear less towering. Her hands were open. Empty. Her wounded shoulder bled. She looked, for once, not like a monster, but like a battered thing cornered by a world that had decided it was allowed to be cruel. The man's breathing hitched. His eyes dropped to Carter's limp, then to Sail's blood, then back to the smoke behind them. Who are you? He stammered. Carter swallowed. My name is Carter. He almost said guard. He almost said accomplice. He almost said traitor. He chose a simpler truth. I tried to help her. That's all. Please. They're coming. As if summoned by the word, a searchlight swept through the trees behind them and caught the road in a white slice. The beam locked for half a second on Sail's silhouette and Carter's face. From far up the road, an amplified voice boomed faintly, closer than it should have been. All civilians remain in your vehicles. This is a restricted operation. The man flinched like he'd been slapped. He looked back at his car, at his phone, at Carter, at Sail. He made a decision. Get in, he said, voice shaking. Get in the back. Both of you. Now. Carter nearly collapsed with relief. He stumbled toward the passenger side, but Sail froze, eyes wide. The car was impossibly small. A trap on wheels. A cage that moved. No, Sail breathed, and the fear in it was naked. Carter grabbed her hand. Sail, it's not a cage, he lied again because he needed the lie to become real. It's a ride. A way out. Please. Sail's chest rose and fell fast. The searchlight swept again, closer. Rotor wash deepened. The sound of vehicles' convoy grew louder somewhere behind them. The man shouted now. They're gonna see you. Sail stared at the open back door like it was the mouth of a monster. Then she looked down at Carter, at his pain, his limp, his shaking hands. And she chose him. She lowered herself, folding impossibly, trying to fit. The car rocked on its suspension as she slid into the back seat, knees jammed, shoulders scraping the roof liner. Glass creaked. The whole vehicle looked like it might simply give up. Carter shoved himself into the front passenger seat and slammed the door. Go, he shouted. The man didn't need a second invitation. He floored it. The car surged forward, tires throwing gravel, and the road pulled them away from the ridge and into deeper darkness. Behind them, the searchlight snapped to follow, sweeping the road like a hand reaching to snatch them back. Carter twisted in his seat, looking through the rear window at the shrinking chaos of the ridge. And in that flashing distance, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. A figure staggering on the roadside under the strobing lights, one arm hanging wrong, waving weakly as vehicles surged past. Voss. Alive. And alone. Carter opened his mouth to scream, to tell the driver to stop, to do something, but Sale's massive hand closed around his shoulder from the back seat, not crushing, just anchoring him. Her voice came low and broken right behind his ear. "Choose," she whispered. And the searchlight behind them locked onto the car. The searchlight behind them stayed on the car like a fingertip pressing on a bruise. It jittered as the helicopter corrected, then steadied, then tightened until the rearview mirror was filled with white glare. The driver, mid-30s, flannel jacket, knuckles white on the wheel, kept his eyes forward like looking back would turn him to stone. "I'm not stopping," he said, voice shaking. "I'm not stopping for anybody." Carter's throat clenched as Voss's staggered silhouette vanished behind a bend and a wall of strobing lights. He could still see her in his mind, waving weakly, trying to be noticed, trying not to fall. Alone on a road that had become a battlefield. Sale's hand stayed on Carter's shoulder from the back seat. It wasn't a demand. It was an anchor. Her fingers trembled slightly, and Carter realized she wasn't telling him to abandon Voss because she didn't care. She was telling him that if he tried to go back, they would both be taken. "Choose," Sale whispered again, and the word sounded like it hurt her now too. Carter swallowed, eyes burning. "Keep driving," he told the man anyway, because he hated the truth, but it was still the truth. "Don't slow down." The road dipped into a tunnel of trees, and for a moment the searchlight couldn't reach them. Darkness swallowed the windshield. The only light came from the dashboard, and the faint smear of orange behind them where fire and emergency lights chewed up the ridge. Carter turned, twisting in his seat as far as he could to look at Sale. She was folded into the back seat like a storm crammed into a closet, knees jammed up, shoulders scraping the roof, breath shallow and fast. Her eyes reflected the dash lights in sharp flashes, and every time the car hit a bump she flinched like she expected restraints to snap shut. "It's not a cage," Carter said, low, forcing calm into his voice. "It's a ride. We're moving away." Sale didn't answer, but her grip on his shoulder loosened a fraction. She was trying. God help him, she was trying. The driver risked a glance in the mirror and immediately regretted it. "What the hell is going on?" he choked out. "They said on the scanner some terrorist thing, they're lying," Carter said flatly. "What's your name?" The man swallowed. "Mason." "Mason," Carter said, "I need your phone. Right now." Mason's eyes flicked to the helicopter glare pulsing through the trees behind them. "I am driving." "Then put it on speaker, unlock it, and hand it back," Carter snapped. "If this stays secret, we die. If this goes public, they have to think twice." Mason fumbled the phone off the center console and shoved it at Carter without taking his eyes off the road. Carter's hand shook as he unlocked it, muddy fingers, cracked nails, adrenaline making everything slippery. He opened the camera first, flipped it to video, and aimed it back over the seat. Sale's face filled the screen, massive, blood-smeared, eyes hard and terrified at once. The torn bandage on her shoulder soaking red. She stared at the phone like it was a weapon. "It's proof," Carter said quickly. "Just stay still for 2 seconds." Sale's nostrils flared. Then she looked away, jaw clenched and held. Carter hit record. "You are recording," the phone chirped, cheerful as a lie. Carter leaned toward it and spoke in a hoarse rush. "My name is Carter Reed. I'm being hunted by a Black Ops unit out of," he swallowed, forcing the words to stay sharp, "out of a clandestine facility. This is Sale. She is not hostile. She has been imprisoned and abused. They attempted to execute us and conceal it. If you find this, share it." He panned the phone slightly so it caught the flashing searchlight through the rear window, the rotor wash glow sweeping the treetops. Mason swore under his breath. Jesus, Carter ended the recording and immediately opened the phone's call app. He didn't call 911 first. He called the one thing that could turn a secret into a problem, the world. He found a local TV station number from memory of living in small towns. Mason's phone autocomplete helped. He hit call. It rang once. Twice. Then of course nothing. Straight to voicemail. Carter cursed and tried another. Then another. A national tip line. Anything. His hands moved like he was racing a bomb timer. Behind them, the searchlight snapped back onto the road, brighter. The helicopter had found a clearer angle. The beam flooded the rear window and Mason hissed, "They're still on us." Carter's phone screen flashed. No service. He stared at it in disbelief. Then he looked at the radio in his lap and felt sick. "They're jamming," he muttered. There actually a loudspeaker boomed somewhere behind them, distorted by distance and rotor wash but close enough to raise gooseflesh. "Pull over immediately. This vehicle is under federal order to stop." Mason let out a broken laugh. "Federal? Out here? At 2 in the morning?" In my truck. Carter leaned forward. Do you have a dash cam? Anything that records without a signal? Mason shook his head hard. No. Just my phone. Sale shifted in the back seat, the car groaning under the movement. Her breathing deepened, and Carter felt her hand slide from his shoulder to the seat pack as if she was bracing for impact. Her eyes tracked the rear window, then the side windows, then the roof, calculating exits like every moving box was a trap waiting to close. Carter turned toward her. Sale, he said, forcing his voice down. Listen to me. If they stop this car, you do not, he swallowed. You do not rip it apart. Not unless they're trying to kill us. Sale's gaze pinned him. They take, she said, voice rough. I know, Carter rasped. But if you lose it in a town, if there are cameras and people, you become their story. We need our story. For a long moment, Sale stared at him, trembling with restraint. Then she said, very quietly, choose together. Carter nodded, throat tight. Together. The trees began to thin ahead. The road straightened, and the darkness broke into scattered points of light, street lamps, porch lights, a gas station sign glowing faintly in the distance. Town. Mason's shoulders sagged with relief and fear at the same time. We're almost to a line of flashing lights erupted at the edge of town like a gate slamming shut. Squad cars. A fire truck. And behind them too clean, too dark, another pair of unmarked vehicles angled across the road. Carter's stomach dropped. They'd gotten ahead of them. Mason slammed the brakes, tires squealing, and the car fishtailed slightly before he caught it. What now? He shouted, voice cracking. Carter's mind raced, turn around and go back into the helicopter beam, or push through and risk a firefight in the street, or Sale inhaled, and Carter felt her whole body coil behind him, the car's suspension groaning as she shifted toward the door. Mason turned his head just enough to see her movement and made a strangled sound. Don't you dare. Carter grabbed Sale's hand blindly over the seat, fingers locking around her thumb. Sale, he said, low and urgent. Hold for me. 1 second. Outside, a loudspeaker from the roadblock barked, closer now. Crisp and local. Driver, turn off the engine and exit the vehicle with your hands up. Then, underneath that local voice, bleeding through in a colder cadence, came the one Carter had learned to fear. Asset confirmed. Prepare containment. Carter stared at the flashing barricade, at the dark unmarked vehicles, at the cluster of civilians behind police tape who were starting to notice something huge shifting in the backseat. He finally understood what Voss had meant by leverage. The only leverage left was whether Sale could hold herself together long enough for witnesses to see the truth before the people with nets rewrote it. And as Carter tightened his grip on her thumb, the first spotlight from the roadblock swung toward their windshield, flooding the car in white, pinning them in place the way the helicopter had, only now with the town watching. The spotlight pinned the car so hard it felt physical, like heat on skin. Mason squinted against it, hands still on the wheel, chest heaving. Carter could see his reflection in the windshield, mud-smeared, wild-eyed, a sick man trying to out-talk a machine. Behind him, Sale's breathing deepened. The back seat creaked as she shifted, shoulders scraping the roof liner. She wasn't moving to attack yet, she was moving the way a trapped thing tests the walls. Carter tightened his grip on her thumb. Hold, he whispered. Hold for me. Sale's eyes flicked to his, and he saw the battle in them. They take verses together. Her jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped. Mason swallowed audibly. What do they want me to do? He asked, voice thin. Do exactly what they said, Carter replied, fast. But slow. Make it slow. Don't make sudden moves. Mason's hand shook as he turned the engine off. The sudden silence was worse, rotors still flooded somewhere behind, but the car itself became a quiet box of breath and fear. He cracked his door open an inch. A local cop's silhouette appeared in the glare, one hand up, the other near his belt. Driver, step out. Mason's voice cracked. There's someone hurt in my back seat. Step out, the cop repeated, but his tone wavered. He could see the car riding low on its suspension. He could sense something was wrong. Carter leaned toward Mason, urgent. When you're out, tell him to call EMS. Say you've got an injured person. Keep it civilian. Make them say no in front of witnesses. Mason nodded, lips trembling, and stepped out with his hands raised. Immediately, 2 officers moved to flank him, guiding him toward the shoulder. Mason kept talking, almost pleading. There's blood. She's hurt. Get an ambulance. The crowd behind the tape had grown people in pajamas, someone in a hoodie filming already, faces lit by phone screens. Carter saw the glint of a news logo on a van parked crooked near the gas station lot, hazard lights blinking. A cameraman stood beside it, hesitating like he didn't know if he was allowed to cross into a federal mess. Carter's pulse spiked. That was leverage. He shoved his window button down. It whined, lowered halfway, and cold air rushed in. Officers immediately snapped their attention toward him. "Sir." One barked. "Put your hands where I can see them." Carter raised both hands, palms out, and leaned toward the opening. "I'm Carter Reed," he shouted, voice ragged but loud enough to carry. "I am unarmed. I'm injured. She is injured. There is a non-human person being hunted and shut up." A different voice snapped, too crisp, too controlled, coming from behind the local line, from the dark vehicles. "Close the window." Carter ignored it and shouted louder, pushing his voice toward the crowd. "Record this. Record them trying to take her. They've been shooting at us." Sale's hand clamped around his shoulder again, not pulling him back, but steadying him as if she could keep him from being dragged out of the car by his own courage. Her breath hitched at the sound of shouting, and Carter felt her tremble. A man in a dark jacket, no badge visible, stepped forward past the local cops, raising a hand like he owned the scene. "Driver and passenger are to be detained immediately," he said, and his voice had that same sterilized authority Carter had heard all night. "This is federal." The local cop nearest the window hesitated. Carter saw at the human moment where someone realizes they're being used. "We need to see what's going on," the cop said cautiously. "Negative," the dark jacket man replied, cold. "You are out of your lane." Carter's eyes flicked to the gas station van again. The cameraman had lifted his rig now, lens pointed, recording. A woman in a station jacket reporter stood beside him, phone at her ear, talking fast, eyes wide. Carter leaned out the window as far as his seatbelt allowed and shouted directly toward them. "Hey, news. Get this on live. They're jamming cell, use your uplink." The reporter's head snapped toward him. For 1 second, their eyes met across the flood of flashing lights and fear. Then she moved. She jogged along the edge of the tape, raising her mic, speaking rapidly to her cameraman. The cameraman swung the lens toward Carter, toward the sagging car, toward the huge, impossible shape shifting in the back seat. Carter felt Sale stiffen as the camera found her. Her pupils tightened. Her chest rose like she was about to bolt. "Sale," Carter said, low but fierce, not taking his eyes off the camera. "This is the opposite of a cage. This is light. Witnesses. This is how we win." Sale's eyes flicked to the crowd, dozens of small faces, phones held up like tiny stars. Not soldiers. Not handlers. People who looked afraid, yes, but also shocked, curious human. The dark jacket man barked into his radio. "Containment team, move in. Now." Carter heard a new sound, hard boots on pavement, coordinated. Shapes advancing from the dark vehicles, armored, helmeted, carrying gear that wasn't police gear. They moved like a closing fist. Sale's breath went sharp. Her hand tightened on Carter's shoulder. Carter turned fully toward her in the cramped space, forced eye contact, and spoke like he was grabbing a ledge with both hands. "Rule 1. Unless you have to." Sale's jaw trembled. Her eyes burned. She looked past him toward the advancing team. Then she looked back at the crowd. A woman behind the tape, older, gray hair, had both hands over her mouth. A teenage kid next to her was filming with trembling fingers. A man in a work jacket whispered, "Holy," and didn't finish. No one was cheering. No one was laughing. They were watching something real punch through the story they'd been told. Sale's fingers loosened a fraction, and right then, through the flashing chaos, Carter saw a figure pushing through the local line, limping, one arm held wrong against her side. Voss. She looked wrecked, face pale, uniform torn, blood dark on her sleeve, but her eyes were still knives. She shoved past a local officer and pointed straight at the dark jacket man. "You," she snarled, loud enough to cut through the noise. "You're done." The man turned, and for the first time Carter saw him clearly in the rotating lights. Calm, clean, almost bored. He smiled slightly, like Voss was an inconvenience he'd already filed. "Commander," he said, conversational. "You're persistent." Voss stepped into the spotlight like she wanted the whole town to see her too. "These people are civilians," she shouted, sweeping a hand toward the crowd. "You deploy a net or a stun lance in this street again, and you're committing an act on U.S. soil in front of witnesses." The man's smile didn't move. "Witnesses can be managed." The sentence landed like ice water on Carter's spine. Voss heard it too. Her face tightened, not fear, but fury. She turned sharply to the local cops. "Sheriff." She barked at someone Carter couldn't see. "If you have any spine at all, You start recording your own comms right now. You get your dash footage secured. You make copies. You do not hand your town over to this. The local cop at Mason's side looked between Voss and the dark jacket man like his brain was trying to pick the version of reality that wouldn't ruin his life. And in the car, Sale whispered, almost inaudible, they manage. Carter swallowed hard. Yeah, he said, voice low. That's why we need this on every camera we can reach. He shoved the phone back into record mode and aimed it out the window at Voss, at the dark jacket man, at the armored team closing in. The reporter's camera light clicked on bright, undeniable framing Sale's silhouette in the back seat. The reporter started talking into her mic, voice fast and tight, like she was forcing her own fear into words that could be aired. This is Channel 7 Live. Near there appears to be an unidentified extremely large person in the back of this vehicle. Federal officers on scene. The armored team hesitated for the first time. Not because they were kind, but because cameras change math. The dark jacket man's smile thinned. He lifted his radio again and spoke quietly, and Carter couldn't hear the words, but he saw every helmet in the containment team tilt as if receiving a new instruction. Sale tensed instantly, reading the shift. Her hand clamped Carter's shoulder again. And Voss, still in the open, still bleeding, took one step closer to the dark jacket man and said something Carter couldn't hear over the rotors and sirens, but he saw her mouth shape the words clearly. Don't. The dark jacket man stared at her for a long, flat second. Then he raised his hand slowly and pointed, not at Sale, not at Carter, at the reporter's camera. The moment he pointed at the camera, the whole street's temperature changed. It wasn't subtle. You could feel it in the way the local cops shifted their feet, in the way the crowd behind the tape tightened like a held breath, in the way the reporter's voice wavered, but didn't stop. The gesture wasn't get them. It was erase the witness. The armored team's front pair started forward. The cameraman instinctively stepped back, keeping the lens up anyway. The reporter kept talking, louder now, words tumbling. Federal agents moving toward our crew. Voss moved too. She didn't lunge like a hero in a movie. She just stepped into the space between them with the kind of stubbornness that had kept her alive in that facility's politics. One arm hung wrong, but her stance was solid. She pointed at the local cops with her good hand and barked, if they touch that camera, you intervene. Right now. This is your town. A local officer, older, a sergeant's stripes, hesitated for half a second and then did something Carter hadn't expected. He stepped forward as well, planting himself beside Voss, facing the armored men. This is a public roadway, the sergeant said, voice tight. You don't lay hands on press here without a warrant. The dark jacket man's smile returned, thin and patient. You are obstructing a federal operation. The sergeant's jaw flexed. Then arrest me on camera. That line landed like a brick. The crowd reacted, murmurs, phones lifting higher, someone shouting, yeah, from behind the tape. The reporter's cameraman swung the lens to catch the standoff. The camera light burned like a small sun. Inside the car, Sale's whole body trembled, but she didn't move. She stared through the glass at the armored team, then at the crowd, then at Carter, as if trying to understand why these small, fragile humans were stepping into the path of something that could crush them. Carter leaned back, close enough that his voice could reach her without carrying outside. They're not all them, he said, hoarse. Remember what you told me. Sale's throat worked. She whispered, almost like she was testing the idea in her own mouth. Not all talk bad. Right, Carter breathed. Hold. Just hold. The dark jacket man's eyes flicked to the crowd, to the phones, to the news camera, then back to the armored team. He spoke into his radio quietly. The armored men stopped. Not because he'd grown a conscience. Because the calculus had flipped. The more force they used in this street, the more evidence they created. This wasn't a culvert anymore. It wasn't a roof and smoke. It was a town with live lights and too many people holding cameras that didn't belong to the facility. The reporter's voice steadied as adrenaline turned into purpose. We are being ordered to stop filming. Local law enforcement appears to be refusing. This is unfolding in real time. Carter's phone buzzed in his hand with a sudden, blessed flicker. 1 bar. Not enough for a call. Enough for a message. He didn't waste time. He hit share on his recorded video and sent it to every contact Mason's phone had that looked like it might multiply. Family group chats. A buddy labeled Dale work. A cousin, anybody. He typed one line with shaking thumbs. Post this. Now. Send. The bar dropped as though immediately after, like the world yanked the cord back out. But the message had left. Maybe. Carter had to believe it did. Outside, Voss turned her head slightly toward the car, eyes finding Carter through the glare. Her lips moved without sound. Keep her calm. Carter nodded once, almost imperceptible. The dark jacket man took a step forward, not toward the camera this time, but toward the local line, toward the sergeant, toward Voss. He spoke in a voice meant to be heard by the people closest, but not by the crowd. This ends tonight, he said, one way or another. Voss's smile was razor-thin. Not in the dark anymore. He glanced toward the car, toward Sale's silhouette pressed against the glass, and his eyes held a faint, clinical disappointment as if the asset had become inconveniently human. Then he turned to the local cops and said something that sounded almost polite. Clear the civilians back. Now. The sergeant didn't move. No. The man's gaze hardened. He lifted his radio again, and for a second Carter thought he was about to order something ugly anyway. Then the reporter's earpiece crackled loud enough that even Carter heard her gasp. We're live nationally, she blurted, half shock, half triumph. They just took us. God, the cameraman's eyes widened. He adjusted his stance, steadied the shot, and kept filming like his life depended on it, because it suddenly might. The dark jacket man froze for a fraction of a second. It was the smallest pause in the world, but it was real. It was the pause of a man who had planned for secrecy and just lost it. Voss saw the pause and pounced on it with words like throw nails. You heard her, she said, loud enough now for the nearest phones to catch. You're on national feed. You want to explain a live execution? The man's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked once to the crowd, to the phones, to the bright news camera light. Then he did something Carter didn't expect. He backed off. Not a retreat of defeat, more like a shark sliding away from a boat that suddenly has too many hooks in the water. He made a small hand motion to the armored team, and they eased back a step, weapons still ready, but no longer advancing. The local cops exhaled like they'd been holding their lungs shut. The crowd surged with murmurs. Oh my God, is that real? What is she? They were gonna. Words broke against each other, messy and alive. Inside the car, Sale's shoulders trembled and then sank a fraction. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dark jacket man, because she knew better than anyone that backing off wasn't the same as stopping. Carter leaned closer to her, voice slow. We're buying time, he whispered. That's what this is. Time. Sale's gaze flicked to the reporter's camera, then to the crowd again. A long, careful breath. Then she whispered, almost inaudible, light. Carter swallowed. Yeah, he rasped. Light. Outside, Voss stepped closer to Mason's driver's side window and spoke quickly, so fast Carter barely caught it through glass. Drive to the sheriff's station, Voss mouthed. Now. Keep the cameras on you. Do not stop. Mason looked like he might faint, but he nodded violently. Carter stared at Voss, heart hammering. He wanted to ask her to come. He wanted to demand it. He wanted to refuse to leave her again. Voss shook her head once, hard, before he could even open his mouth. Then she pointed subtle toward the dark jacket man, then toward herself. I'm the anchor. Carter's throat closed. Voss straightened and turned back toward the lights, planting herself again between the car and the men who wanted Sale back in a box. She looked smaller than ever in the flashing glare. She also looked unmovable. Mason started the engine. The sound drew every eye. The spotlight followed as the car crept forward an inch. The dark jacket man lifted a hand slowly like he was deciding whether to let them go or to force the issue anyway. Sale's hand closed around Carter's shoulder again, not in fear this time, but ready. Carter's heart slammed. And in the middle of that suspended moment, engine idling, cameras rolling, Voss bleeding under the lights, the reporter's voice rang out clear and sharp over her live feed. They're trying to move the vehicle. Federal personnel appear to be deciding whether to allow it. The dark jacket man's hand twitched. And Carter realized, with a sick lurch, that the next second was going to decide whether this ended in a courtroom or in blood on Main Street. The dark jacket man's hand hovered in the air like a judge about to drop a gavel. Mason's engine idled, a small, ordinary sound that suddenly felt rebellious. The crowd's phones stayed raised. The news camera light stayed on. Voss stood in the open, one arm useless, the other hand loose at her side like she decided she wasn't going to flinch first. For a long second, nobody moved. Then the dark jacket man's gaze slid past the car and landed on the reporter's lens again. Not with anger. With calculation. He was weighing the cost of forcing this against the cost of letting it roll and trying to reclaim control later. Voss made the decision for him. She stepped half a pace closer, just enough that the nearest microphones could catch her if they were on, and said, loud and clear, state your name and agency for the cameras. It was a simple question. It was also a trap. The dark jacket man's expression didn't change, but the tiny hesitation returned. Names create records. Records create hearings. Hearings create prisons. He didn't want a name attached to this in a world that had just turned its lights on. He didn't answer. Voss nodded once like that told her everything she needed. Then she raised her voice again, turning slightly so the crowd and the reporter could hear. You have no warrant. You have no jurisdiction here without documentation. You have already endangered civilians with aerial capture equipment. And you are now attempting to detain an injured civilian and an injured non-human person without due process. The words were clean and legal and deadly in a different way. The local sergeant beside her looked like he wanted to throw up, but he didn't move. He picked his side the moment he said arrest me on camera, and now he was stuck with it. The dark jacket man exhaled through his nose, almost amused. He spoke into his radio quiet, clipped. Helmets tilted. The armored team shifted, not forward, but sideways, opening a lane. Mason's eyes went wide. Are we allowed? Carter didn't trust it. Drive, he said, flat. Slow. Straight. Don't give them an excuse. Mason eased forward. The spotlight tracked them, but the muzzle lines didn't rise. The cops didn't rush the doors. No net dropped. No stun lance hummed. The car rolled into the open lane like an animal walking out of a snare that might still tighten. As they passed, Carter locked eyes with Voss through the glass. She didn't smile. She just lifted 2 fingers to her temple, an ugly little salute, and then pointed toward the town, toward safety, toward somewhere with walls and paperwork and cameras that didn't belong to the facility. Carter's throat tightened so hard he couldn't speak. He nodded once. In the back seat, Sale watched Voss as they moved away. Her eyes were bright in the flashing light, and Carter felt her fingers tighten briefly on the seat pack as if she wanted to reach out and take Voss too. Then Sale looked at the crowd. Some people stared like they'd seen a demon. Some stared like they'd seen a miracle. But nobody was laughing now. Nobody was telling themselves it wasn't real. The story had become too big to stuff back into a file drawer. The reporter's voice followed them, carried on loudspeaker and live feed. The vehicle is moving toward the sheriff's station. Carter reappears inside. There is a large injured individual in the rear seat. Federal personnel are not intervening at this moment. Mason drove with both hands welded to the wheel. Where's the sheriff's station? 2 blocks, the sergeant called from somewhere behind, his voice carried by the night. Straight down. Turn at the diner. The road ahead opened into the center of town. Tiny, sleepy storefronts, a diner sign, a closed hardware store, a church with a dark steeple. A place that should have been quiet and boring and safe. Tonight it was lit up like a stage. And that's when Carter noticed the helicopter still overhead, farther back now, holding position above the roadblock like a patient predator that had learned to wait. Don't look up, Carter muttered, mostly to himself. Sale did anyway. Her face tightened, but she didn't move. She didn't bolt. She didn't brake the car. She stayed folded into the back seat and breathed through the claustrophobia because Carter's hand was still on her wrist, and because the streetlights ahead weren't cage lights, they were town lights. They turned into the sheriff's lot. The station wasn't big brick, 1-story flagpole out front, but the parking lot had become a barricade of squad cars and bodies. Deputies rushed out, not with rifles raised, but with hands up in a different way, palms out, voices shouting to hold the crowd back, to keep lanes open, to stop anyone from doing something stupid. Mason rolled to a stop. For a heartbeat, nobody moved again. The whole lot held its breath, because this was the moment where fear usually wins, where someone panics and a trigger gets pulled and the world gets simpler in the worst way. Carter moved first. He cracked the passenger door and raised both hands immediately. I'm coming out, he called, loud enough for every camera. I'm injured. I'm unarmed. A deputy, young, eyes wide, approached slowly, then stopped when he saw Sale's silhouette behind the glass. His face went pale. An older deputy, maybe the sheriff himself, pushed forward past him. He didn't look at Sale first. He looked at Carter. You Carter Reed? The sheriff asked, voice steady. Carter nodded. Yes. Are you under duress? Carter swallowed. Yes. The sheriff's eyes flicked to the reporter's camera that had followed, to the phones, to the crowd now spilling into the lot like water. He took a breath and made a choice that Carter could see in the set of his shoulders. Then you're under my protection on my property until someone shows me a warrant that holds up in daylight, the sheriff said. Behind Carter, Sale shifted in the back seat and the car creaked. A ripple of fear ran through the crowd. Someone gasped. A phone camera zoomed. A child started crying. Carter turned and opened the rear door slowly. "Sail," he said, low and firm. "We're safe here. As safe as we can be." Sail stared at the open door like it was a mouth again. Her breathing quickened. The smell of people, lights, pavement, and fear hit her at once. She looked ready to retreat into the car forever. Carter stepped closer and put both hands where she could see them. "Come out," he said gently. "Slow. Hands open. Like we practiced." Sail's eyes locked on his. Her throat worked. Then she moved careful, shaking, folding herself out of the car in increments that made the suspension rebound like it was relieved. She rose into the open air of the parking lot, towering under streetlights that made her look impossibly real. The crowd noise swelled shock, fear, awe, disbelief. And Sail lifted her hands, palms open, just like Carter asked. The sheriff stared up at her, eyes wide, and then deliberately he lowered his own weapon hand away from his belt and said, loud enough for every microphone, "No one fires unless fired upon." Understood? It wasn't peace. It wasn't perfect. But it was a line drawn by someone who wasn't part of the facility's machine. Carter's knees nearly buckled with relief. He looked up at Sail and saw her watching the crowd, trembling under the weight of 100 eyes, holding herself together by sheer will. The asset label had nowhere to hide now. This was a person standing under a flagpole in a small town while cameras rolled. A siren wailed in the distance, more units arriving. The helicopter still thumped overhead, but it stayed back. For now. Carter leaned closer to Sail and whispered, "We bought daylight." Sail's gaze flicked down to him. Her voice came rough but clear, in words she'd fought for. "Light." Carter nodded, throat burning. "Yeah. Light." And as the reporter's live voice carried across the lot naming Carter, showing Sail, asking questions that couldn't be unasked, Carter realized the fight wasn't over, not really. But the kind of fight had changed. No more culverts. No more cages in the dark. Now it would be courts, hearings, names, and a world that had finally seen enough to refuse to forget. Sail's hand found Carter's shoulder, gentle, steady, and she held on. Not as a captor, as someone who had made it out.